yeah, like I said, my name's Tim Youngquist. I've worked on this project for about 2 years. I grew up on a farm in northwest Iowa. Been in our family since 1871. So for me, I guess I've always kind of been around it. I mean, it's been the heritage of my family since they came to this country to be farmers. Since this is my first time down here, is people heard of this before? The STRIPS program?
I saw it in the Practical Farmers.
Okay. It's a fancy acronym. It stands for Science-Based Trials of Row Crops Integrated with Prairie Strips. The acronym's a little bit clunky, but it's a pretty cool idea. And basically what we're trying to do is integrate prairie back into corn and soybean fields primarily. So this is focused a little more at big ag, but just hearing folks going around the room and talking, there's a lot of the same ideas in this program. I think kind of some of the same reasons that folks came out tonight. We've been doing this for about 150 years, and I just, started thinking about like what's the next 150 years going to be, and how do we get into the next century kind of with what we know now. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about the program, some of the details that we've gotten from the science-based part, the research, and then we can either open it up for questions, or if you have any questions as I'm going through, feel free to jump in.
It's not always the wisest thing to say to this group.
Well, I'll get through it. You know, I'm assuming everybody in here lives in Iowa, or is at least for some time since we're in Iowa, and modern agriculture is incredibly productive. It's a little bit over 20% of Iowa's total economy is the corn and soy, and it's the cornerstone of what goes on here, just because we have really incredibly productive soil. I mean, to me, I think it's the best soil on the planet. Now, corn and soybeans cover 75% of the land area of the entire state of Iowa. So there's about 22 or 23 million acres of the state of Iowa that are covered with 2 crops, and that's for about 5 months of the year. Now, unless there's a cover crop or some kind of other situation, there's bare dirt for the other 7 months of the year. And, we get this incredible productivity that comes with the corn and the soy, but with this system, I mean, everyone who's here kind of understands this, but are there unintended consequences of this system that we have right now? Obviously, came to this point through advances in technology and the soil in Iowa being kind of perfect for row crops, and we didn't get here by accident. I don't know any farmers that intentionally want to pollute the water, that want to lose their soil. That's not the idea. So I think these unintended consequences that we're seeing from farming, we're starting to find out that yes, there's nitrate and phosphorus that's coming off the fields, it's hurting the water, we're losing soil, we're losing productivity. But why does this matter? Why do we even care about it? Well, like I said, to me it's family. Like, this is from Harvest, that's my little niece, and to me farming is just so much, it's intertwined with family for me. And I want to be able to have, my children's children, years and years and years from now, still be able to farm on the same land that we're farming now. So that's why it's important for me. And the big hypothesis, or the big question with the prairie strips when it started, was, can we achieve production and conservation on the same acres? So we're talking about, the corn and soy, bigger stuff. About 10 years ago, the idea for prairie strips was started by a handful of professors at Iowa State. This idea of using prairie alongside corn and soy was too funky for Iowa State, so they wouldn't allow us to do our research on Iowa State land. So we approached the Fish and Wildlife Service at the Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge in Prairie City, where they have some ag land there, and we convinced them that it would be a good idea for us to install prairie strips, or this idea that was potentially going to add habitat and clean water, and they agreed to that. So in 2007, they seeded prairie strips at the refuge. That's kind of what you see here. There were 12 different watersheds. They're all only about 1 to 8 acres, so pretty small. Everybody's familiar with a watershed. That's just an area of land where every raindrop that hits that is going to funnel to the same place. That'd be a watershed. So these little 1 to 8 acre fields were like micro watersheds, and within that we could account for all the flow of water that was coming into that site and leaving the site. Why Prairie? Well, Prairie used to cover about 85% of the entire state of Iowa. This would have been a couple hundred years ago, and now there's less than 1/10 of 1% of that original prairie is left, and a lot of that is row crop now. So what we were kind of looking to do was bring back what was once the dominant ecosystem or the dominant ground cover and kind of try to, inject it back into the dominant land cover that we have now, it's corn and soy. So that's why Prairie. And also you can see from the picture to the right there, prairie plants are no joke. They're nothing like a lot of the grasses that we have, brome, that's a really common one that you see alongside of the road in the ditches. That only has a root system that's a couple feet deep. Prairie plants can get 12 to 15 feet deep with their roots and thick. And there's also an incredible amount of above ground biomass. The way that we laid out the experiment, because everything's being closely monitored, on the left side, all that yellow, think of that as just corn ground. And then we started by taking 10% of that watershed at the very bottom, so at the bottom of that watershed where all the water's leaving, and converting that into prairie. And we also tried taking 10% of the overall acreage, putting some at the bottom, so about 3%, then 3% in a strip, and then 3% in another strip above that, to kind of reduce the length of slope as that water's coming down the hill, just to infiltrate it, slow it down. And then we tried 20% in the same configuration at the bottom and then in 2 contour strips. These were really traditional. This is in the fall when the beans are getting harvested. You can see the strips and some of the instrumentation behind the combine there. So 2-year corn soybean rotation, really common for what you get for most of the ag land in the state of Iowa. The science-based trials part, there's an incredible amount of instrumentation on these watersheds. The really big thing, you see this metallic structure there that's featured in all the pictures. That's called a hydraulic flume or an H flume. Basically think of that as a funnel at the bottom of the watershed, and now that's collecting all the surface flow, all the little raindrops that come down through there in a rain event. And I guess you can't see it here, but there's a little hose in it. It's attached to an auto sampler, which is that picture on the lower right. So every time there's a measurable rain event, that would mean 1/4 of an inch or more, that thing automatically kicks on, pulls a sample out, and then there's a modem attached to that, and that sends a signal to Iowa State. And some of the techs come and they get the water samples. So that happens every time it rains. So we're really trying to monitor, the movement of the water, the sediment, and the nutrients off of these fields.
If it's a longer rain event, will it
Get multiple samples? Yep, correct. So just to give you an idea, this to me is one of the more impressive pictures. So this is one 4-inch rain event in June of 2008. If you remember back, that was an awfully wet year. It was a year Cedar Rapids flooded. On the left, so there's 100% crop. That'd be just your kind of run-of-the-mill cornfield in the state of Iowa. It's
and that's
a little,
but that's no-till. That's supposedly the best.
Correct. Yep.
Conservation.
That's no-till. Yep. So, and everyone understands no-till means they're not turning the soil at all. They're planting the crop. They're harvesting the crop. They're doing some herbicide applications, some fertilizer, but the ground isn't getting scritched up at all. And then in the middle, 10% prairie. You can see there's still sediment coming off, but it's not 8 inches thick. And then on the right, just by contrast, that's 100% prairie, and you've got perfectly clear water coming off of that system. And as I was saying at the beginning, to me that's the most valuable soil on the planet, right there. And after one rain event, you've got gobs of it just washing away. I mean, the best soil in the world, like that is the infrastructure.
Do you guys have pictures from the 20% in the contrast to the 20?
I guess I'll get into that a little bit more. What we found was that between 0 to 10, so this was the kind of the sweet spot, and from that 10 to 20%, you didn't see much of an increase. You know, there was already, let's see what I got next. Yeah, just another picture of the same. But I guess we just found it didn't make that much of a difference to go up to the 20%. And with these prairie strips, the seed is going to be a little bit expensive, but by far your biggest cost is the opportunity cost of the land you take out of production. You know, when you're doing just traditional corn and soy, it's challenging to convince farmers to take that land out of production. So,
Do you see any difference in the yield in the cropped areas in between the strips?
at this point, we haven't. We've seen no effect. But that's something, and I'm not going to be able to answer your questions very well because, so this study started in 2007. For about 2 years, we've been rolling this out on private farms, and that's my role, is to do the design, do the seed mixes, do the seeding, all that. But if you know anything about Prairie, it takes multiple years just to get established, and a lot of these were seeded in the last year to 2 years. So we've got a little bit of data, but it's going to take some time before we can find all that stuff out. I mean,
I would hypothesize that if you're slowing that water down, you might be retaining more water and more moisture available for it to grow.
Yep.
You might see a yield bump.
And that's something that so I'm not a scientist, I studied urban planning, but everyone I work with are scientists, and they're big time sticklers about us not saying anything that is not, like, we have all these hypotheses that we believe are going to be true, and I wouldn't be doing this project if I didn't think it was a good thing, but we have no evidence of that at this point, but we're still absolutely looking into it.
Do you have trials that are organic farms in addition to conventional?
Yep. Yeah, we have at this point 2 organic farms. The phase 2 is what we're calling it, where we're rolling this out on the bigger commercial farms. So that's all voluntary. It's all people that come to Iowa State. You know, at this point, we just haven't had enough exposure. You know,
right. Yeah. No, that's what I was asking. It seems like there'd be a difference between. There's a difference between, like, you know, healthy living soil in that isn't having a fungus
Anhydrous shoved down it, and then
right, as opposed to, and then the prairie itself seems like it would be healthier if it's not having to be exposed to all that. So
yeah, we have a couple of those, and kind of continuing to expand, but it's just the newness of the program, and I'm the only person in the state of Iowa that this is a full-time job for. Everyone else, you know, teaches or does research or something like that. So I fully believe that this will catch on, and I mean, we're really starting to see it get larger and larger, but just it's gonna take more time. So just to reiterate, why Prairie? If you go out and walk through Prairie, there's an incredible diversity of species. In the native Prairie, there would have been 400 to 500 species. Now in these, you know, just physically the stems are larger on prairie plants, on the natives, because they have those deep roots. So as that water hits the strip, it kind of has to pinball around in, and it infiltrates, rather than, if you think about brome or what's in the ditches during a big rain event, what happens? It lays over, because brome is designed to convey water. This is designed to impede water. So what did we find? I guess what I think is kind of staggering, so just looking at some of these numbers, the total amount of water that's running off that field, now this is in a year, would be 40%. So, sir, I don't remember your name, but yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, it's just keeping more water, and the majority of that is in the spring, when there is no crop, nothing, you know, taking up the water. So a lot of that, the prairie strips, just having that perennial crop there grabs that water that otherwise would just run off traditional field. The amount of nitrate leaving the field is reduced by 84%. The phosphorus leaving the field, which is mostly what's caught in the dirt, is at 90%. So there's the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy that's trying to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus, And this really hits both of those things and keeps them on the field where they're valuable and keeps them out of the waterways where they become pollution. And at this point, they've had no effect on yields. They've also had no effect on weed densities, so people worry, is the prairie going to kind of creep out into the crop? At this point, if you think about the life of a seed in a cornfield, that's either getting tilled or getting sprayed, that's going to be very, very tough for a weed to kind of leave those strips. So, I guess there hasn't been any of that. The edges of the strips look very clean. For progress, it's a blurry picture, but we're at almost 24 sites at this point, kind of all over the state. What we're trying to do is get a series of these demonstration farms around the state, because in order to convince farmers to do this, it's very, very effective for them to just see it in person, to be able to talk to other farmers that have worked around it and just seeing how it's working for their operation. So a big part of my job, is going around the state doing outreach events like this, and then kind of trying to get as far to the corners of the state as I can, just for field days or for people that are interested.
Is Francis Dickey one of your demo sites?
He's not. Nope. We do have some overlap with PFI. Some of our members that have done the strips are also in PFI, but it's Francis isn't. If anyone here is thinking about doing something like this on your own land, first thing you have to think about, what are your goals? Do you want wildlife biodiversity? Are you worried about erosion? Are you worried about nutrients? You have to think about what you want. Is production the most important thing to you? Is biodiversity the most important thing? Just kind of start there and ask yourself what direction you want to go. And then just the physical characteristics of the land. You have to think about the contour and the slope of that ground, because Iowa's not flat. From field to field, it's very, very different. And then considering that soil type, you're going to have your clay type soils, your loam soils. They're just going to behave differently when they get wet, so you have to think about that too, and also think about the kind of plants that you want to put in. And then also the corn suitability rating. As I mentioned, the cost of land, or that land being taken out of production maybe isn't necessarily the right word, but being put into prairie, it's not going to generate the same kind of revenue, or it's not going to generate the same kind of revenue with the same equipment that you have for corn and soy. So you really have to think about, maybe taking out some of your lower producing land that's costing you, diesel fuel, herbicide, seed inputs, fertilizers, all these things. Every little square of the field is not equal in a cornfield or soybean field. What do you have for existing conservation practices, terraces, things like that? Farmability is one of the big things I think about. So I've been in a tractor ever since I was a kid, and trying to stay to the contour is ideal, but if you create something that is not farmable, or you're creating really small rows or increasing the amount of time dramatically that it's going to take for a farmer to go through his field, it's never going to take off. So you have to think about what we do is whatever the farmer's most limiting piece of equipment, that'd be the widest piece of equipment. Try to set the strips at intervals of whatever that piece is, so you create uniform farming lanes rather than creating little pizza shapes or little oddball angles. If you had a 120-foot wide sprayer, you wouldn't want to make like a 50-foot wide bottleneck, something like that.
Is that where you come in and design the layout of the...
Yep, so I use GIS, which is just like a mapping software, looking at the contour of the soil type and then talking with the farmer. The farmer always knows, every person that I've gone and talked to has always had like an erosion story, or they've taken me out to a gully that's the worst spot, and that's usually where we start, and it's usually not a scavenger hunt. You can really see those ephemeral gullies that form, you know what I mean, those little ditches, where you see the soil running. That's an incredibly efficient way to move soil. Basically think of an auger in the field, just taking your topsoil off. So the biggest thing with prairie strips, I guess, is getting in those areas where the water's flowing and stopping it, equipment with feasibility. we shoot for the 10%. I mean, 20% would be even better, but maybe 3%, maybe 5%. Maybe adding an acre here, an acre there is what's going to work for a particular operation. If we could do 20%, I mean, we're not going to discourage that by any means, but for a lot of people, it's just whatever's going to be feasible.
But it's nice that you can show them that what happens at 10%.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm thinking, wow, I'd be happy if a farmer did 10% because the improvement is so great.
Yep.
And I wouldn't blame them if they didn't go to 20%.
No.
It's not that much more improvement.
Yeah, that picture has really worked wonders for us. We had a farmer up in Dickinson County, which is Spirit Lake, that saw that picture and then wanted prairie strips. I mean, it was as simple as that. So, yeah, important taking pictures and all that. Maintenance access, again, with Prairie. Those first couple of years, you really want to mow several times because if you don't, your annual weeds are going to start cooking right away as it starts raining, and your prairie seedlings will be about this big and they'll get crowded out, and then your diversity will suffer. So you can't strand these things on islands out in the middle of the field. You can, but then you would have to cut down some crop to get to them. So basically either connect it to a fence row, an existing driveway, a terrace. I mean, something that you'd be able to get equipment to it to do work. Because yeah, without repeated mowings in the first year and then some into the second year if needed, your diversity will be very affected in a negative way.
So I was going to ask about the maintenance of the strips. Are you doing burns?
On the strips at Neil Smith we have, none of the other strips are new enough or
Okay.
old enough, I guess.
But that's the plan.
It would be,
So I kind of had like how many, a lot of the like prairie mixes that you can get like through a DNR are like 10, 12 species, right? They're not really a prairie mix, like you said, 400 or 500. So I was curious, what is the, like how much diversity are you putting into those? And then like in a long term, are you planning on replanting those if you can't burn them? Because I know a lot of folks are going to be real sketchy about burning through. Or have you had any trials with burning? That's the whole.
Yeah, so the strips at Neil Smith, they were planted in 2007. They were burned last year. So I got to go down there and participate in that. And absolutely, burning can be a magic wand with prairie. I mean, it's really that the native species are adapted to fire. A lot of the weeds or the invasives are not. So that can be a really good way to control that. But we don't want to make it seem like that's the only route that you can go, because that would be maybe a limitation for some people if they thought that they had to burn them. Prior to burning at Neil Smith, when it doesn't get burned, it is hayed and then the biomass is removed, so that can duplicate some of the effects of burning. And that's something, that biomass, it's about 3.1 tons per acre. It's more valuable as bedding than it is as forage, but then that could still be something that you could.
Depends on where you're growing it, but yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't know how. So if we go back, like so, Prairie covers Iowa, but before that we've got Oak Savannah, we've got animals coming through, and we've got so 3 Native Americans controlling that prairie burning. We've got it being controlled with essentially haying, right, and fertilizing, and mammoths walking around knocking stuff over. Have you considered and I know that they aren't going to let you run pigs on that, but have you considered just like going through and kind of simulating that kind of a physical distress? The haying is doing that to some degree, instead of burning cyclically.
Yeah,
Like a mock grazing one time through.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, and the cattle would probably be the closest thing that people are going to let you do.
Once you get the corn out and run your cattle through it, if someone has a cattle operation, I mean,
So
probably
maybe
not
that
every.
is.
So I should have made you guys wait with the questions until after. So
That's what I was thinking.
a lot of that is addressed. We've got a cooperator in southwest Iowa that grazes the strip or grazes his fields after the crop has been taken out, and he's found that the cattle will bed down in the strips just for warmth. I don't know enough about grazing prairie to give any kind of recommendations, but I know that it's something that people have been talking about. Do you know White Rock Conservancy?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're getting strips that are planted this fall, and the land manager there really wants to build kind of a mobile paddock and try that idea.
Fantastic.
So it's something that people have been thinking about. I know you'd really have to move them around pretty regularly,
Yep.
because if you hit it too hard, I think you can hurt
Yeah,
the
and you
diversity.
want either cyclically or with multiple species, and then,
Okay.
yeah, the trip would be moving real fast through.
You know,
Yeah. I'm glad to hear it. It's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people would be really resistant to in a very conventional setting, but, I mean, something like White Rock has a lot of people are going to pay attention to that, so.
And the species mix, again, that goes back to the first bullet point, the goals. You know, you get into some of the more rare or the more hard to harvest forbs or the flowers, the prices can be very expensive. So we're not trying to really replicate the native prairie. You know, we're not trying to encourage people to plant the several hundred species. At this
Have you
point-
seen an increase in species kind of naturally coming in?
At the Neil Smith strips we did, but the Neil Smith strips are surrounded by the largest prairie reconstruction in the country. So, yeah, I think what was planted at Neil Smith was like 34, 35 species. So that was kind of the starting point.
That's
And
a
I think
lot
there's-
compared to what most people do.
Yeah, and I think now there's 39 or 40 species or something there. You know, were they in the seed mix and they just weren't cataloged at first? I don't know. We've got a postdoc that's doing an analysis of the species as they change in the strips over the years, and then also looking at the native bee species and kind of how that's interwoven. Statistics. I don't understand it, but so that's something that people are thinking about. I think 80 species was the most that we've had seeded, and maybe 16 was the lowest. So I mean, it's a continuum.
I think the current NRCS mix that we used was like 36.
Okay.
That seems about average.
Yeah, and with the prairie, you want to get a little bit of diversity, because if you don't have enough, the worry is as years go on, the ecosystem will collapse. There just won't be enough diversity, and the things will kind of crowd each other out, and you'll end up with just a couple of species as the years go on. So you got to kind of find that right balance. But from an agronomic perspective, even a perennial crop of weeds would do better than what we have now.
Well, I was going to say, at least with haying systems, you could leave a 20-foot strip that you just didn't mow, and you
Yep.
have kind of, as far as runoff, probably similar mechanical action.
Yeah, as long as you have the living roots still in the soil and not just the dead roots, you get that nitrogen and phosphorus go back.
So just a quick run through of what did we talk about. Where do strips go? Well, figure out where the water goes through the field. And the biggest thing is, water's not flowing over the land evenly. If you've got a hill, yes, where does water go? Water goes down the hill, right? But if you have, a hill going this way and then two hills that dip in this way, and then you've got an area of concentrated flow, and that's where you get these ephemeral gullies forming. And with the prairie strips, you want to just intercept that on the way out of the field. If you do nothing more than just kind of get in the way and slow it down from running off the field, you'll benefit. What we've done is taken the traditional kind of edge of field buffer or riparian buffer, and then pair that with some contour buffers up the strip just to slow the water down. And if you're only going to do one thing, that edge of the field buffer in the area of concentrated flow, that would be the most important part of the whole thing. That filter at the bottom, that's kind of the diaper, I guess. It's like the last line of defense. Like that's what really stops the nutrients and keeps the soil sediment in place. So instead of just having, kind of a line that goes along the creek, think about where your concentrated flow areas are, having kind of a half moon shape or a little kind of a gumdrop thing that would be there, wider buffer, because water doesn't flow evenly over the land. Think about areas where the water's flowing and just kind of make a little bubble there. If you're involved in farming, you're usually not a one-man army. There's usually a whole kind of cadre of people, whether that's family or business partners or whoever it may be. So getting as many people at the table during your initial talks, getting as many generations at the table as possible, so everyone's kind of moving in the same direction and understands why you're doing this. I'm a prairie enthusiast, so to me this makes sense, but it's kind of an oddball idea for some people, so you really want to.
Well, you've got to be hitting an Iowa farmer mentality. I mean, they like straight lines with no weeds, grass this tall,
Yep.
you know, and everything clean and ordered, and you know, and they look at this and it almost gives them hives.
Oh yeah, this is a pretty receptive room. Some days it's the peaks and the troughs. You know, some groups receive it better than others. But for me, I mean, yeah, I grew up on a farm. Like, you know, I wore a DuPont hat here. You know, I can kind of play that game too. So that's one thing that makes me valuable to Iowa State, is I can kind of be the pivot point between their researchers and then the actual on the ground people. And that's all those bullet points I talked about. I mean, it's the feasibility. It's whatever's going to work for that person, and kind of being as flexible as possible and not coming out and kind of trying to, you know, pound them into this is what we're going to do. So layout is very critical. So I work for a state university that's got a lot of resources, and we've got this RTK GPS backpack that we can use. With the big farming equipment, you don't want to be off on your spacing, because then that could be a huge headache years down the road. You don't want to slow down implementation because you put them in the wrong spot. You can get a lot more old school with it, you know, measuring wheel, laser level, open reel tape. I mean, there's a lot of different tools that we've used. If you knew the width of your equipment, you could count rows if there were still existing rows in the field. So there's a lot of different ways that you could do it. What kind of plants in the strips? Yeah, that's the 80 species mix. Just a diverse mix of local ecotype seed. That's what we try to encourage. You know, everything that we've been a part of has been local ecotype, and it's been as diverse as we can possibly get. You know, we're not trying to introduce exotic species. Yeah, not that complicated. What kind of equipment can you use to plant these strips? There's a lot of options. You know, on the larger scale, like a native seed drill, broadcast seeder. If you had only a couple acres, I mean, you could hand broadcast. You know, like this mid-November, I mean, this is perfect when it's nice and cold, and you can hand broadcast, and the freeze thaw will kind of wiggle the seeds down into the right layer. I mean, this is what was evolved to be here. It wants to survive. You know, you'll generally kind of find out what your soil likes. So. Grass waterways, this is not something that would replace a grass waterway. Now these are strips of mostly brome or some type of fescue that run up and down the hills. This would be in those areas of concentrated flow. So the prairie strip works kind of in coordination with that. The water is slowed on the way down the hill and then possibly funneled into the waterway. But then at the bottom of the hill, that little half moon shape, that would be all the way through the waterway. The brome would be taken out and it would be reseeded with natives. What's it look like? Well, this is the first year. This is a 20-foot wide strip. That's about as narrow as we'll go. This is on an Iowa State research farm. We always use a nurse crop of some type, and a nurse crop is just something like oats, winter wheat, annual rye, something like that, depending upon what time of the year it is, because that will help start growing right away. That'll keep your weed pressure down. And you can see it makes the strips look very robust, where in the first year, a lot of your prairie seedlings are going to be about 6 or 8 inches tall at the end of the year. You know, they're not going to be much to look at. So if you can get a nurse crop out there, it'll be really easy for the farmer to see it. You know, if you're paying someone else to do work on the field, you want them to be able to see it and not have, you know, spray drift or tillage drift or something like that. So nurse crop, and then they're not very competitive. If you can keep that mode and keep it from going to seed, it'll basically go away in the second year. Second year, so still you can see a couple of black-eyed Susans, little yellow guys. You know, there's not much going on here. I mean, this is pretty early in the season. It doesn't look like a whole lot. If you have weed pressure still from the first year, keep it mowed in the second year. That'll really help your diversity. And then patience, it's easy to say this, but with corn or with beans, you plant it in the ground, you baby it a little bit, and you harvest it. With prairie, it's so much more patience involved, just from an agronomic perspective. It's not the same at all. But if you're willing to show a little patience, man, it looks really pretty. You get to that third year, and then you really start to see what you think of, in your brain as a prairie. Like you might get some of that in the first 2 years, but it's really not going to come on until the species mature, because that's the nature of the ecosystem. And then year 3 and beyond. So if you can run a fire through it right away, that's great. But a lot of times there's just not enough biomass in those first couple of years. The fire won't crawl through it. If you could get a fire through it, you certainly could. Because like I said, the prairie species are fire tolerant, where the weeds are not. So that can really help. There's federal cost share programs available to help to pay to put this in. There's no specific prairie strips code at this point. That's in the works, but that'll be a multi-year process. So what we've done so far is to use these existing standards to kind of hobble together a system, combining filter strips, combining pollinator habitat, contour grass strips, habitat buffers, things like that. So it is something that would be a 10 to 15 year contract, but if you'd be willing to do that, that would be a way to make revenue. There's a lot of different things. But 3.1 tons per acre, that's a lot of biomass. There's a lot of material out there. Grazing, so this is in southwest Iowa. You can see cows out there hanging out. The future, like I said, for a lot of people, farming is a family affair, and there's more to it than just the profits you can make now. I think you have to think a little bit about what you're leaving, or what kind of legacy you're leaving. So I've been around farming my whole life. I just think that this is truly blurring the lines between production and conservation. We're having different groups coming to us that are interested in this, commodity groups, different agencies, and farmers coming to field days and things like that you wouldn't traditionally expect being interested in conservation. And it's getting the production people and the conservation people in the same room and talking, and I think it's a pretty gentle way to go to get those kind of results, and there's a lot of benefits that come from the prairie strips. We got plenty of time for questions if you're interested. This website, so leopold.iastate.edu/strips, the movie. It's like a little 12 or 15 minute video where we talk to farmers, talk to different agency folks, people that have worked on the project. You can kind of see it from their point of view, and that's something to do at work tomorrow. Think about it. Then prairiestrips.org, that's our website. You can check that out. That's got all recent technical publications, promotional materials, our social media stuff, and then contact information for all the people. We're expanding that all the time, but that'd be a place to go for more info. If you're into the Twitter thing, we have that, and Instagram as well. And yeah, that's all I have. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to talk about it more, or if anyone has comments. Yeah.
Has the tribe ever came to you with any of what you're doing?
You're from Meskwaki, you're saying? There was an Iowa State Extension agronomist that Mark Johnson that was talking to us about contacting the Meskwaki, but we have a lot of inquiries, so that just nothing ever came of it, I guess. But it's something that I could give you my card if you'd be interested in having someone from the team come talk or something like that. But yeah, at this point we haven't had any crossover.
I'd like to see pollinators planted out there.
Okay.
Start producing honey. Start small. That's my ideas. I want to start small. I want to work with people that want change.
Yep.
That's my ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, and from the map, we go a lot further away So something that was relatively closer to Iowa State would be better too, just for getting back and forth for researchers and all that. So yeah,
It's just down Highway 30.
yeah, sure, yep, that'd be great.
So is there any value in these prairie pollinators, like starting it and saving the seeds? Basically, I want to be able to go to the council and say, this is a viable option that we could do on our land. We've got over 1,000 acres.
Well, that was something that Jeff asked me about coming down here was, would there be any kind of companion crop that you could plant in the strips? Some kind of like a vineyard or nut trees, fruit trees, something like that. You could do that and sell that crop. With the prairie itself, you could cut the hay, you could sell that. Prairie seed is worth a lot of money, but you have to be able to harvest it, dry it, store it, sell it, market it, all that stuff. I think that there is a lot of value for that, but the value chain hasn't been created yet.
I'm putting all my feelers out there to get anybody I can to get help in any way we can.
Yeah, harvesting the prairie seed, it would take a couple of years before you could harvest it, but scissors and a 5-gallon pail and a box fan, that's all you need to start. It's pretty simple, but it would just, you'd have to have the facilities, and then you'd have to have people to sell it to. But I think the smart money would be in, growing prairie and then selling it to other farmers, because I think there's going to continue to be more and more regulations on larger farms, and from the amount of attention and amount of interest that we've seen in this program, I think the trend line's really going up, and there's not going to be enough people that are supplying prairie seed. At this point, like last year, it was hard to buy common milkweed seed because there's all the interest for the monarchs.
Man, there's so much going on in our settlement. They were just...
Well,
I went to, when I went and did my permaculture certificate, I was in class with somebody who does that, who grows and sells native seed. So if you wanted me to contact her and you wanted to just ask questions, I'm sure she'd be happy. She was really glad to talk to anybody about what she does and is very passionate about it.
And that might be something to bring sort of the education into, you get the junior high kids out there, expose them to the prairie, what you're doing, and then you've got free labor for the afternoon too.
Well, another thing I was thinking about.
Well, you can always run little seed packets in the gift shop in the casino and probably recoup all of your investment right there.
Yeah.
The problem is there's so many different organizations. It's just like out here in the community. How do you get the community involved, and how do you get the people, who are your key players involved?
I think the order of operations here is get several thousand acres of prairie planted, and then you have the ability to have somebody invest in the automation to bring in and actually harvest it. There's a guy, Colin something or other, I can't remember his name. He pioneered something called pasture cropping, where he actually grazes a grain crop, then harvests a grain crop. A lot of what he's transitioned, he's used grain crops, and he does essentially pasture and grass seed areas. So he'll plant it, and then he brings and grazes through as it's growing. I think he gets two, three cycles off of it. Then he lets it come up, and then he harvests it either as grain or for seed, if it's one of the grasses. And then he goes back through and he just keeps grazing. So he's constantly got living roots in the soil, even under his he calls them cereals, but even under his grains. Right?
Who was this guy again?
Colin, I can't remember his last name. So the thing is, though, he does this because he doesn't really have a winter cycle. He's in Florida. But there's a guy in Kansas, Gabe Brown. Is that the right? You know what I'm talking about? So he's working with Colin because there were a bunch of us sitting around at PD2 last year trying to figure out where the line was for how much cold you could have and make this work. And we had a bunch of people from Wisconsin who were really excited about it, but they don't have a long enough growing season. But the idea is that maybe in a Zone 5 you would. So in a southern Iowa or in a Kansas, you might have a growing season to be able to get into this pasture cropping idea, but then you have a scenario where you have the ability to onto that. If you look up pasture cropping, you'll start to find some of that information. But again, it's very dependent on having a season long enough to let that grow back into maturity after you've grazed it. So I don't know of anybody doing it here in the U.S., just people talking about it so far.
Do you have anyone cover cropping in the no-till systems?
Yeah, that's something they've been thinking about at Neil Smith, and we have several other private farmers that have cover crops integrated into this too.
Okay.
We're just trying to get people to think of it as more of a whole system. You know, it's not like the prairie strips or the silver bullet or the magic answer. I mean, you have to pair that, with your contour farming, with your cover crops, with your no-till. I mean, just another tool for the toolbox or another option.
Yep. And with the nutrient reduction, I'm assuming most of the soil is tied up in these strips. I guess if you have any thoughts or how to get that back into the production areas, or
So you would think so, and that's something people ask a lot. Like on the upper edge of the strip, do you get like a snowdrift of soil? Excuse me. At Neil Smith, I mean, those have been there for almost a decade, and there's no noticeable bump in the strips or anything. I mean, what is it? A ton of soil per hectare is like the thickness of a dime or something like that. I mean, it takes a long time to accumulate that. Now, we only have strips that are 10 years old. I mean, what are they going to look like in 30 years? It would probably more be, we're not pouring concrete out there. You're just putting prairie strips, and if you were to, after say a 15-year period, want to move the strip either upslope or downslope, you could plow it up, get the benefits from all the extra nutrients and carbon that are stored in the soil, and then move it up 10 feet or downslope or something like that.
I think I shouted out all my questions as they occurred to me.
Okay.
So yeah, kind of.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for inviting me down.
thanks for coming to talk.
Yeah, there's some promotional material and stuff over there.